The day I caught Brenda Worthington directing an Amazon delivery truck onto my private driveway, like she owned the place, was the day I realized this woman had lost her mind. I was sitting at my desk in my home office, trying to finish a proposal for work, when I heard the distinctive rumble of a large truck engine struggling down the narrow dirt lane that led exclusively to my property. My property, not hers, not the neighborhood's, mine. I jumped up from my chair and practically sprinted to the front window. Sure enough, there was an Amazon Prime delivery truck lumbering down my private lane, kicking up clouds of dust that would take hours to settle. And, standing at the junction where my lane branched off from Willow Creek Drive, the main road through our development in Asheville, North Carolina, was Brenda. She was gesturing enthusiastically, waving the driver forward like an air traffic controller, her phone pressed to her ear with her other hand. My name is Oliver Yates, and I had moved to this quiet neighborhood in the Blue Ridge Mountains 6 months ago, specifically because I wanted privacy. I worked from home as a software consultant, and I had paid good money for a 5-acre property with its own private access lane. The lane was a quarter-mile long, unpaved, and led from Willow Creek Drive straight to my house. It was clearly marked with "Private Property No Trespassing" signs at the entrance. I'd even installed a chain barrier that I could lock when needed, though I usually left it down for my own convenience. Brenda Worthington was the self-appointed president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, a position she took far too seriously. She was in her late 40s, always dressed like she was about to attend a country club luncheon, and had the kind of perpetually pinched expression that suggested she spent most of her time looking for things to complain about. Her perfectly highlighted blonde hair was always styled in the same helmet-like bob, and she drove a white Mercedes SUV with a custom license plate that read HOA Prez. I grabbed my jacket and headed outside, my boots crunching on the gravel as I walked toward where the Amazon truck had stopped near my front porch. The driver, a young guy who looked to be in his 20s, was scanning packages in the back of his truck, clearly confused about why he was delivering to what appeared to be the middle of nowhere. "Excuse me," I called out as I approached. "Can I ask why you're on my private property?" The driver looked up, startled. "Oh, hey man, sorry, I'm just following the new delivery instructions. Amazon updated the routing for this whole neighborhood. We're supposed to use this lane now instead of going through the main entrance." "The main entrance?" I asked, my confusion growing. "What are you talking about?" He pulled out his phone and showed me a map with delivery routes highlighted. "See, normally we come in from the south entrance off Highway 25, drive through the neighborhood, and hit all the houses on Willow Creek Drive. But someone from the HOA requested a change. Now we're directed to use this private road here." He pointed to my lane on the map. "It supposedly cuts our delivery time by 15 minutes because we don't have to loop through the whole development." I felt my jaw clench. This is my private lane. It's not part of the HOA. Who requested this change? Let me check." He scrolled through some emails on his phone. "Looks like a Brenda Worthington. She sent multiple emails to Amazon Logistics saying the HOA had approved a new delivery route for efficiency. She even provided documentation that looked official." Of course she did. Brenda had a talent for making things look official when they suited her purposes. I had learned this the hard way 2 months ago when she tried to fine me for painting my house a color she deemed non-compliant with community standards, even though my property wasn't actually subject to HOA rules. I had bought one of the original properties in this area, built before the HOA was established. My deed explicitly stated I was not part of the association, which Brenda conveniently ignored whenever it suited her. "I need you to turn around," I said firmly, but politely. "This is my private property, and you don't have permission to be here. I don't care what the HOA president told Amazon. She has no authority over my land." The driver's eyes widened. "Look, man, I'm just doing my job. If I don't follow the routing, I get flagged by the system. Can you maybe take it up with Amazon or the HOA lady?" "I will, trust me, but right now, I need you off my property. Can you back up to the main road?" He sighed heavily. "It's going to take me like 20 minutes to back this thing up that narrow lane. Any chance I can just turn around here?" I glanced at the space near my house. There was technically enough room if he was careful. "Fine, but this is the last time. After today, no more Amazon trucks on this lane. Understood?" "Understood." He looked genuinely apologetic, which softened my irritation. This wasn't his fault. As the driver carefully maneuvered the truck into a three-point turn, I walked back down my lane toward Willow Creek Drive, where I knew Brenda would still be lurking. Sure enough, she was standing there with her phone, probably coordinating the next delivery. "Brenda," I called out as I approached. She turned, and her expression immediately shifted from satisfied to defensive. "Oliver, I was just helping optimize the neighborhood delivery system. By directing commercial trucks onto my private property without my permission?" She waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. It's just a delivery truck. Besides, using your lane is much more efficient for everyone in the neighborhood. We get our packages faster, and Amazon saves time. It's a win-win. Except I didn't agree to it, and you have no right to use my property for HOA purposes. You know, I'm not part of the association." Her eyes narrowed. "Your property abuts HOA land. We have a right to reasonable access for community improvements." "No, Brenda, you don't. And delivery routing isn't a community improvement. It's you overstepping your authority again." She crossed her arms, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her elbow. "I've already submitted the formal paperwork to Amazon. It's done. The routing is in the system now. You can't just change it back because you're feeling territorial. Watch me." I pulled out my phone and immediately called Amazon customer service. Brenda stood there, a smug expression on her face, clearly thinking I wouldn't be able to navigate the corporate bureaucracy quickly enough to matter. After being transferred 3 times and spending 45 minutes on hold, I finally reached someone in the logistics department who could help. I explained the situation, sent photos of my property deeds showing the private lane, and filed a formal complaint about unauthorized route changes. The representative assured me they would investigate and correct the routing, but warned it might take a few days to process through their system. By the time I hung up, Brenda had left. I walked back to my house, annoyed but confident I had set things in motion to fix the problem. That confidence lasted exactly 2 days. On Thursday morning, I was awakened at 6:30 by the sound of not one, but 2 Amazon trucks rumbling down my lane. I threw on clothes and ran outside to find both drivers looking confused, comparing notes about deliveries. They had arrived simultaneously, both following the same routing that was supposed to have been corrected. "Are you kidding me?" I shouted, more to the universe than to the drivers. One of them, a woman in her 30s, stepped forward. "Sir, we're just following our route assignments. If there's a problem, you need to contact dispatch." "I already contacted Amazon. This was supposed to be fixed." "Well, it's still in our system as the primary route for this zone." I rubbed my face, trying to contain my frustration. "Fine. Deliver your packages and get off my property. But I'm calling Amazon again." What followed was a week-long nightmare of bureaucratic runarounds. Every time I called Amazon, I was told the issue was being investigated. Every morning, delivery trucks continued using my lane. The constant traffic was starting to damage the unpaved surface, creating ruts and potholes. Worse, the dust kicked up by the trucks was covering everything: my car, my windows, even getting inside my house despite keeping the doors and windows closed. I tried calling Brenda multiple times, but she never answered. I left messages, I sent emails, nothing. She was avoiding me, probably enjoying the chaos she had created. On the 8th day, I decided to take a different approach. I researched property rights and easement laws in North Carolina. What I found confirmed what I already knew. Brenda had no legal right to grant access to my private lane. More importantly, I had every right to block access to my property as long as I wasn't interfering with any legitimate easements, which I wasn't. That afternoon, I went to the hardware store and bought several large concrete barriers, the kind used in parking lots and construction zones. I also purchased a heavy-duty chain and padlock system for the entrance to my lane. The whole setup cost me nearly $800, but I considered it an investment in my sanity. The next morning, before sunrise, I installed the barriers at the entrance to my lane. I positioned them in a way that completely blocked vehicle access while still leaving a gap for me to walk through. I attached clear signage: "Private property, no trespassing video surveillance in effect." For good measure, I also set up a game camera pointed at the entrance so I could document any attempts to move the barriers. At 7:30, right on schedule, an Amazon truck approached. I watched from my front porch as the driver stopped at the blocked entrance, stared at the barriers for a moment, then picked up his radio. I couldn't hear what he said, but I imagined it was something along the lines of, "Houston, we have a problem." The driver sat there for about 5 minutes, presumably getting instructions from dispatch. Then he carefully backed up, turned around at the nearest driveway, and headed back toward the main neighborhood entrance. Oh, I felt a surge of satisfaction. Problem solved, right? Wrong. 20 minutes later, my phone started ringing. It was a number I didn't recognize, but the caller ID showed it was from Asheville. I answered. "Mr. Yates, this is Carol Henderson from Amazon Logistics. I'm calling about the barrier you've installed on Willow Creek Drive." "You mean the barrier I installed on my private lane?" "Yes, sir. That barrier is preventing our drivers from completing their delivery routes. I need to ask you to remove it immediately." With all due respect, I contacted Amazon over a week ago about the unauthorized routing through my property. I was told it would be corrected. It hasn't been. So I'm exercising my property rights to block unauthorized access. Mr. Yates, I understand your frustration, but blocking the route is causing significant delays for all the residents in your neighborhood. We have over 40 deliveries scheduled for that area today alone. Then I suggest you use the legitimate entrance to the neighborhood like you did for years before Brenda Worthington decided to play traffic controller. There was a pause. "Sir, we're trying to provide efficient service to all our customers. The route through your property saves considerable time and fuel costs." "That's not my problem. My property is not public infrastructure. If you want to use it, you need an easement agreement, which requires my permission and typically compensation. Since I'm not granting permission, you need to find an alternative route. Mr. Yates, I'm going to have to escalate this to our legal department." "You do that. In the meantime, the barriers stay up." I hung up, feeling both vindicated and slightly anxious. I wasn't worried about the legal aspects. I had done my research. But I knew this was going to cause a major disruption, and Brenda was going to be furious. She didn't disappoint. By noon, my doorbell was ringing aggressively. I checked the camera first and saw Brenda standing on my porch, her face flushed with anger. Behind her were 3 other residents I recognized from neighborhood gatherings: Margaret Collins, a retired teacher who lived 2 doors down from Brenda, Robert Chen, an accountant who took HOA rules very seriously, and Patricia Norton, who seemed to follow Brenda around like a devoted minion. I took a deep breath and opened the door. "Brenda, what can I do for you?" "You can remove those barriers immediately," she practically shrieked. "Do you have any idea what you've done? No one in the neighborhood has received their Amazon deliveries today. People are furious." "Then they can take it up with Amazon, who's been illegally trespassing on my property for the past week, despite my repeated requests for them to stop." Margaret stepped forward, her voice more reasonable than Brenda's. "Oliver, I understand you're upset, but couldn't we work out some kind of compromise? Maybe certain hours when deliveries are allowed?" "No," I said firmly. "This is my private property. I didn't buy this land just to have it turned into a commercial thoroughfare. Amazon has a perfectly good route through the main entrance. They can use that like they always have." Robert adjusted his glasses, his expression stern. "The HOA bylaws clearly state that all residents must act in the collective interest of the community. I'm not an HOA resident, Robert. My property predates the association and is explicitly excluded from its jurisdiction. Brenda knows this. She's known it from day one." Patricia, who had been silent until now, spoke up in a whiny voice. "But my prime delivery was supposed to arrive today. I need those items." "Then you'll get them when Amazon uses the correct delivery route," I replied, trying to keep my patience. Brenda's face was turning an alarming shade of red. "I'm calling the police. You're interfering with commerce and blocking public access." "Go ahead. Explain to them how you convinced a private company to trespass on someone else's property for your convenience. I'm sure they'll find that fascinating." She pulled out her phone and actually did call. I stepped back inside, but left the door open, curious about how this would play out. The dispatcher must have asked questions because Brenda kept repeating illegal roadblock and refusing to cooperate and community emergency. 20 minutes later, a sheriff's deputy arrived. He was a middle-aged man with a weathered face and the kind of tired expression that suggested he had dealt with HOA disputes before. His name tag read, Deputy Morrison. "Afternoon, folks," he said, his tone neutral. "Someone want to explain what's going on?" Brenda immediately launched into a dramatic retelling of events, painting me as a selfish property owner who was deliberately sabotaging the neighborhood's delivery service. She made it sound like I'd committed some kind of public safety violation. Deputy Morrison listened patiently, then turned to me. "And your side?" I explained calmly, showing him my property deed, the boundaries of my land, the documentation of my private lane, and the emails I had sent to Amazon requesting they stop the unauthorized access. I also showed him the photos I had taken of the damage the delivery trucks had caused to my unpaved lane. The deputy studied everything carefully, then looked at Brenda. "Madam, this appears to be private property. The homeowner has the right to block access if he chooses." "But what about the neighborhood? What about our deliveries?" "That's between the neighborhood and Amazon, madam. It's not a law enforcement matter. If Amazon wants access to this property, they need to negotiate an easement with Mr. Yates. You can't just designate someone else's private land as a delivery route." Brenda looked like she might explode. "This is ridiculous. You're taking his side?" "I'm not taking anyone's side, madam. I'm explaining property law. Now, unless there's an actual crime being committed or a legitimate emergency, I'm going to have to clear out. I've got real calls to respond to." After the deputy left, Brenda and her entourage stood in my driveway for another few minutes, arguing among themselves. Finally, they left, with Brenda shooting me a look that could have melted steel. The rest of the day was blissfully quiet. I checked my game camera footage around sunset and saw that 3 more Amazon trucks had approached the barrier throughout the afternoon, realized they couldn't get through, and turned back. Mission accomplished. That evening, I received an email from Amazon's legal department. It was a formal letter written in corporate legalese, essentially admitting that the route change had been implemented without proper verification of property rights. They apologized for the inconvenience and assured me the routing would be permanently corrected within 48 hours. They also offered me a $50 Amazon gift card as compensation for the trouble, which I found both amusing and slightly insulting given the $800 I had spent on barriers and the damage to my lane. I replied accepting their apology and declining the gift card, but requesting compensation for the repairs needed to my lane. I attached photos of the ruts and damage with cost estimates from a local grading company. To my surprise, within 3 days, I received a response agreeing to reimburse me $1,500 for the repairs. Apparently, they wanted to avoid any potential lawsuit. With that settled, I thought the matter was closed, but I had underestimated Brenda's determination and her complete lack of boundaries. The following Monday, I woke up to find a certified letter in my mailbox from the Willow Creek HOA. It was a formal notice claiming that my barriers constituted a visual nuisance and violated community aesthetic standards. They demanded I remove them within 72 hours, or face fines of $100 per day. I read the letter twice, then laughed out loud. The audacity was almost impressive. Brenda was now trying to use HOA regulations to force me to remove the very barriers I had installed to protect my property from her schemes. I called my lawyer, Daniel Pasternak, whom I had consulted during my previous dispute with Brenda about the house paint colors. Daniel was a real estate attorney in his 50s, with a reputation for being thorough and not suffering fools gladly. "Let me guess," he said when I explained the situation. "Brenda Worthington strikes again?" "How did you know?" "Because she pulls this stuff constantly. I've represented 3 other homeowners in disputes with her HOA. She likes to pretend the HOA has authority over properties that aren't actually part of the association. It's either ignorance or deliberate harassment. I honestly can't tell which. What should I do about this letter?" "Send a response stating, clearly and unambiguously, that your property is not subject to HOA jurisdiction, and that any attempt to enforce fines or regulations will be met with legal action for harassment. I'll draft something for you. Also, start documenting everything, every interaction, every letter, every attempt she makes to interfere with your property. We might need to file for a restraining order if this continues." Daniel sent me a strongly worded response letter that same day. I signed it, had it notarized, and sent it via certified mail to the HOA board. I also sent copies to each individual board member, which included Brenda, Robert Chen, Margaret Collins, and 2 other residents I barely knew. The 72-hour deadline came and went. The barriers stayed up. No fines arrived. Amazon, true to their word, had corrected the routing. Delivery trucks were now using the main entrance again, adding those 15 minutes to their route, but staying off my property. The drivers probably weren't happy about it, but that wasn't my concern. My lane was quiet again, the dust was settling, and I could work from home without constant truck noise. For 2 weeks, everything was peaceful. I actually started to relax, thinking maybe Brenda had finally gotten the message. Then one Saturday morning, I was having coffee on my back deck when I heard an engine sound coming from the wrong direction. My property backed up to a wooded area with an old logging road that hadn't been used in years. The road was technically on state forestry land, but connected to my property at the back corner. I walked around to investigate and couldn't believe what I was seeing. An Amazon delivery van, one of the smaller prime vehicles, was carefully navigating the overgrown logging road, clearly attempting to access my property from the rear. I ran toward the vehicle, waving my arms. The driver, a young woman who looked barely old enough to have a license, stopped and rolled down her window. "What are you doing?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. "I'm sorry, sir, but I have packages for Willow Creek Drive, and my GPS is routing me through here. The normal route has been marked as blocked in the system." "By who?" She checked her device. "It says an alternate route was approved by the local delivery coordinator due to road construction on Willow Creek Drive." "There's no road construction. Let me see that." She showed me the screen, and sure enough, there was a notation dated 3 days ago stating that Willow Creek Drive was temporarily impassable due to utility work and the drivers should use alternate access routes. The notation was signed by someone named B. Worthington Community Liaison. I felt my blood pressure spike. Brenda had actually submitted false information to Amazon, claiming road construction that didn't exist, just to force delivery drivers back onto my property through a different route. "This is completely fabricated," I told the driver. "There's no road construction. Someone is lying to Amazon to force access through private property. You need to turn around and use the actual neighborhood entrance." The young woman looked distressed. "Sir, I can't. This logging road barely fits my van. There's no way to turn around. I need to keep going forward." She was right. The logging road was narrow and overgrown. Backing up would be nearly impossible. "Fine," I said, frustrated. "Go ahead and exit through my property this one time, but I'm calling Amazon immediately to report this fraud." She nodded gratefully and carefully continued forward, emerging onto my backyard, and then circling around to exit via my lane. As soon as she was gone, I was on the phone with Amazon again. This time, I asked to speak directly to a supervisor in the fraud prevention department. After explaining the situation, including the false road construction claims, I was transferred to someone who took the matter much more seriously. "Mr. Yates, submitting false routing information is a serious violation of our vendor and liaison policies. Can you provide documentation that there's no actual road construction?" "I can do better than that. I can provide contact information for the Asheville Public Works Department and the County Road Commission. They'll confirm no construction permits have been issued for Willow Creek Drive." "That would be very helpful. I'm also going to need you to send us any communications you've had with this B. Worthington regarding the delivery routing." I spent the next hour compiling emails, letters, and documented phone calls. I included the letter from the HOA about the barriers, my lawyer's response, and even the deputy's incident report from the day Brenda had called the police. I created a comprehensive timeline of Brenda's actions and sent everything to Amazon's fraud department. 3 days later, I received a call from an Amazon executive named Thomas Riley. He was calling from their regional headquarters in Charlotte. "Mr. Yates, I want to apologize on behalf of Amazon for the ongoing issues you've experienced. We've completed our investigation, and I want you to know we're taking several actions. First, Brenda Worthington has been permanently banned from submitting any routing changes or delivery instructions for our service area. Second, we've flagged your property in our system with special protection status. No routing changes affecting your address can be made without direct verification from you personally. Third, we're considering filing a formal complaint with local authorities regarding the false construction claims, which may constitute fraud." I appreciate that, I said, but I'm more concerned about preventing this from happening again. Is there anything else you can do to ensure the HOA president can't interfere with deliveries in the future? We've actually reached out to the broader Willow Creek community through a mailer that will go out tomorrow. It explains that any future delivery routing changes must be verified through proper channels, and that individual residents cannot alter routes for commercial vehicles without property owner consent. We're also training our local delivery coordinators on property rights issues. That sounded promising, but I had a feeling Brenda wasn't done yet. I was right. 2 days after my conversation with Amazon, I found a notice posted on my front gate. It was an official-looking document, complete with the HOA seal, declaring that the Willow Creek Homeowners Association was filing a lawsuit against me for interference with community services, creation of public nuisances, and failure to maintain community standards. The claims were absurd. They alleged that by blocking my lane, I had caused significant emotional distress to residents who had experienced delayed deliveries. They claimed my barriers were an eyesore that diminished property values. They even suggested that my actions constituted a conspiracy to damage the reputation and efficiency of the HOA. I immediately forwarded the notice to Daniel Pasternak. He called me back within an hour, and I could hear the irritation in his voice. Oliver, this is harassment, plain and simple. The HOA has no standing to sue you for actions taken on your own property, especially when you're not even a member of the association. This lawsuit will be dismissed, but we're going to need to file a countersuit for malicious prosecution and harassment. Is that really necessary? I just want to be left alone. That's exactly why it's necessary. People like Brenda Worthington don't stop unless there are consequences. She's been doing this for years, bullying property owners into compliance even when she has no legal authority. It's time someone pushed back hard enough that she learns a lesson. Daniel filed our response to the lawsuit and simultaneously filed a countersuit against the HOA and Brenda personally for harassment, trespass by proxy, and abuse of process. He also filed for an emergency restraining order preventing the HOA from taking any further action against my property. The hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks later in Buncombe County Superior Court. In the meantime, I continued my daily life, trying to ignore the tension that had developed in the neighborhood. Several residents who I had previously been friendly with now avoided me. I could see them whispering when I drove past. A few had clearly sided with Brenda, believing her version of events, but there were also residents who quietly reached out to express support. Margaret Collins, surprisingly, sent me a handwritten note apologizing for her earlier confrontation. She explained that she had since learned the full story and didn't agree with Brenda's tactics. 2 other neighbors stopped by to tell me they had also had problems with Brenda's overreach and appreciated someone finally standing up to her. The weeks before the hearing were relatively quiet, though I noticed Brenda had ramped up her HOA activities. There were suddenly new rules about lawn maintenance, fence heights, and holiday decorations. She was clearly trying to assert authority wherever she could, probably feeling threatened by the legal challenge. I spent the time preparing for court, working with Daniel to organize evidence and prepare testimony. We had everything: the property deeds, the correspondence with Amazon, the deputy's report, photos of the damage to my lane, and documentation of Brenda's false construction claims. We also had statements from several Amazon drivers who had been confused by the routing changes. The morning of the hearing arrived. I wore a suit, something I rarely did anymore since working from home. Daniel met me at the courthouse, looking confident. "Remember," he said as we walked in, "this is a civil hearing, not a trial. The judge is just going to review the evidence and make a ruling on both the HOA's suit against you and our countersuit. Be respectful, answer questions directly, and don't let Brenda get under your skin if she says something inflammatory." The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with wood-paneled walls and uncomfortable benches. Brenda arrived with the HOA's attorney, a thin man in his 30s named Gerald Hutchins, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I recognized a few other residents in the gallery, including Robert Chen and Patricia Norton, presumably there to support Brenda. Judge Catherine Reynolds entered, and we all stood. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. I had looked her up online, and learned she had a reputation for being fair but impatient with frivolous cases. "Done. All right," she said once everyone was seated. "I've reviewed the filings from both parties. Let me start by saying that this case appears to be fairly straightforward from a legal perspective, but I want to hear testimony to understand the full context. Mr. Hutchins, you're representing the HOA. Please present your case." Hutchins stood and launched into a presentation about community standards and the importance of cooperation among neighbors. He painted me as a difficult, uncooperative property owner who had deliberately sabotaged an efficient delivery system that benefited everyone. He claimed the HOA had acted reasonably in trying to optimize services for the community, and that my response had been disproportionate and harmful. "Your Honor," Hutchins said, "Mr. Yates's actions have caused significant disruption. Residents have experienced delayed deliveries, missed packages, and general inconvenience. While we acknowledge that Mr. Yates's property may not be formally part of the HOA, his property lies within our community boundaries, and his actions affect all residents. We believe there's a reasonable expectation of cooperation and community spirit that Mr. Yates has violated." When it was Daniel's turn, he methodically dismantled every argument. He presented the property deed showing my land was explicitly excluded from HOA jurisdiction. He showed the timeline of events, demonstrating that Brenda had unilaterally directed Amazon to use my property without consent. He presented evidence of the damage to my lane and my repeated attempts to resolve the issue through proper channels. "Your Honor," Daniel said, "this case is about one person, Ms. Worthington, who has repeatedly abused her position as HOA president to exert control over property she has no authority over. Mr. Yates has been patient and followed proper procedures. He contacted Amazon multiple times to correct the unauthorized routing. Only after those attempts failed did he exercise his legal right to block access to his private property. The HOA's lawsuit is retaliatory and completely without merit." Judge Reynolds asked several pointed questions. She wanted to know exactly when I had contacted Amazon, what responses I had received, and why I had chosen to install barriers rather than continue working with the company. I explained that after a week of being told the routing would be fixed while trucks continued damaging my property daily, I felt I had no choice but to take direct action. I showed photos of the ruts and dust damage, along with estimates for repairs. The judge then turned her attention to Brenda. "Ms. Worthington, did you contact Amazon and request they route deliveries through Mr. Yates's private lane?" Brenda stood, her voice confident. "Yes, Your Honor. I was trying to create efficiency for the entire community. The route through Mr. Yates's property saved time and reduced traffic congestion in the neighborhood." "Did you have permission from Mr. Yates to use his property?" "I didn't think I needed permission. It was just delivery trucks, not permanent use. And his property connects to the neighborhood. I thought it would benefit everyone, including him." "But his property is not part of the HOA, correct?" Brenda hesitated. "Technically, no, but it's surrounded by HOA properties, and we believed there was an implied access right." Judge Reynolds's expression hardened. "There's no such thing as an implied access right for commercial vehicle routing. Ms. Worthington, did you also submit false information to Amazon about road construction on Willow Creek Drive?" The courtroom went silent. Brenda's face paled. That was a miscommunication. I had heard there might be construction planned." "Might be planned?" "Ms. Worthington, the evidence shows you submitted a formal notification claiming active construction was blocking the road. That's not a miscommunication. That's falsifying information to achieve a desired outcome." Daniel leaned over and whispered to me, "We've got her." Judge Reynolds spent several more minutes questioning both sides, then called for a brief recess to review the evidence. When we returned 30 minutes later, her decision was clear. "I'm going to make several rulings," she said. "First, the HOA's lawsuit against Mr. Yates is dismissed with prejudice. Mr. Yates acted within his legal rights to protect his property. The HOA has no standing to sue for actions taken on property outside its jurisdiction." Brenda's face fell, but the judge wasn't finished. "Second, I'm granting the countersuit filed by Mr. Yates. The evidence clearly shows a pattern of harassment and abusive process by the HOA, specifically by Ms. Worthington in her capacity as president. I'm ordering the HOA to pay Mr. Yates $15,000 in damages and legal fees. Hutchins stood quickly. Your Honor, the HOA has limited funds. That amount could significantly impact the association's ability to function. Then the board should reconsider having Ms. Worthington in a leadership position, Judge Reynolds replied sharply. Additionally, I'm issuing a restraining order preventing Ms. Worthington and the HOA from taking any enforcement actions against Mr. Yates's property. Any future contact must be in writing and copied to Mr. Yates's attorney. Any violation will result in contempt charges. She paused, looking directly at Brenda. Ms. Worthington, regarding the false construction claims to Amazon, I'm referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for potential fraud charges. Filing false reports to a commercial entity to manipulate their business operations may constitute criminal fraud. Brenda gasped. Your Honor, I never intended. Your intentions don't matter. Your actions do. The DA will investigate and determine whether criminal charges are warranted. The judge banged her gavel, and the hearing was over. I sat there for a moment, almost unable to believe it had gone so well. Daniel was grinning ear to ear. That went even better than I hoped, he said quietly. Judge Reynolds doesn't tolerate HOA overreach, especially when there's fraud involved. As we left the courtroom, I could see Brenda arguing with Hutchins in hushed but clearly heated tones. Patricia Norton was crying. Robert Chen looked shell-shocked. Other residents who had attended were whispering among themselves, some looking vindicated, others appearing troubled. Over the next few weeks, the neighborhood dynamics shifted dramatically. The news of the court decision spread quickly. Several residents reached out to me, some to apologize, others to share their own stories of Brenda's overreach. I learned that she had been trying to impose rules about everything from the types of mailboxes people could have to the breeds of dogs allowed in the neighborhood, all without actual authority. A week after the hearing, I received a letter informing me that an emergency HOA board meeting had been called. Margaret Collins, who was on the board, sent me a personal note explaining that several board members and residents were calling for Brenda's removal as president. Margaret didn't ask for my involvement, but she wanted me to know that change was coming. 2 weeks later, another letter arrived. The HOA board had voted unanimously to remove Brenda Worthington as president and from the board entirely. They had also voted to refund her the legal fees from the lawsuit out of a separate fund to avoid the judgment impacting the general HOA budget, which would have raised dues for everyone else. Brenda had reportedly threatened to sue the board for wrongful removal, but Hutchins, their attorney, had explained she had no case. The district attorney's investigation took longer. I was contacted twice for statements and to provide documentation. 3 months after the hearing, I learned that Brenda had been charged with filing a false report and attempted fraud. Because it was her first offense and the actual damages were limited, she was offered a plea deal: probation, community service, and a requirement to take a course on legal ethics and property rights. According to neighborhood gossip, Brenda accepted the plea rather than risk a trial. She was also required to issue a formal written apology to me, which arrived via certified mail. The apology was terse and clearly written by an attorney, but it existed. The concrete barriers remained at the entrance to my lane for several more months. Eventually, once I was confident Amazon's routing was permanently corrected and there were no more attempts to use my property, I removed them. I kept them stored in my garage, though, just in case. The game camera stayed up, still recording everyone who approached the entrance to my lane. I had learned the value of documentation. Life gradually returned to normal. The new HOA president, a reasonable man named David Kim, who worked as an engineer, reached out to introduce himself and assure me the association had no interest in interfering with my property. He was working to reform the HOA's practices and establish clearer guidelines about what the association could and couldn't do. I continued working from home, enjoying the peace and quiet I had originally moved here for. My lane repaired nicely with the reimbursement from Amazon, and the dust settled, both literally and figuratively. Occasionally, I'd see Brenda around the neighborhood. She'd always quickly look away or turn in the opposite direction. Her white Mercedes with the HOA PREZ license plate disappeared, replaced by a more modest sedan with regular plates. According to Margaret, Brenda had become much quieter, attending fewer neighborhood events and keeping to herself. Part of me felt bad about how everything had turned out. I hadn't wanted to destroy anyone's life. But another part of me recognized that consequences were necessary. Brenda had been abusing her position for years, and if my case helped establish boundaries that would protect other residents in the future, then it had been worth the stress and expense. About 6 months after everything concluded, I was surprised to receive a visit from Margaret Collins. She came to my door with a plate of homemade cookies and a sheepish expression. "Oliver, I wanted to thank you," she said when I invited her in. "I know that sounds strange after everything that happened, but you did something a lot of us had been too afraid to do. Brenda had been making life miserable for so many people, but she was so aggressive that most of us just went along with her demands rather than fight. You stood up to her, and it's made a real difference." "I appreciate that, Margaret. I really wasn't trying to cause problems. I just wanted my property respected." "I know. And that's what makes what you did even more important. You weren't being difficult or unreasonable. You were simply asserting your rights. It's a lesson our whole community needed to learn." She told me about the changes the new HOA board was implementing: clearer bylaws, term limits for board positions, and a requirement that any new rules be approved by a vote of the membership rather than imposed by the board. They had also established a formal process for residents to appeal HOA decisions without fear of retaliation. "It's what the HOA should have been from the beginning," Margaret said, "a cooperative organization that serves the residents, not controls them." After she left, I sat on my back deck with a cup of coffee, looking out at the woods behind my property. The old logging road was barely visible, already being reclaimed by nature. My lane was quiet, just the way I liked it. I thought about everything that had happened, from that first Amazon truck rumbling down my driveway to the court hearing and the aftermath. It had been exhausting and stressful, but I had learned important lessons about standing firm, documenting everything, and not backing down when you're in the right. More importantly, I had learned about the importance of community boundaries. HOAs could serve useful purposes, organizing neighborhood improvements and maintaining common areas. But they needed clear limits and accountability. When one person was given too much power without oversight, it inevitably led to abuse. My phone buzzed with a notification. An Amazon delivery was arriving today, routed through the main neighborhood entrance as it should be. I smiled, finished my coffee, and went back inside to work. The battle with HOA Karen was over, and normal life had returned to Willow Creek. My private lane stayed private, deliveries went to everyone as intended, and I had my peace back. Sometimes standing your ground and saying no to unreasonable demands was the only way to maintain sanity and property rights in modern suburban America. Months continued to pass, and the changes in the neighborhood became more permanent. The new HOA board under David Kim's leadership proved to be everything Brenda's regime wasn't: transparent, reasonable, and respectful of individual property rights. They published monthly newsletters detailing the association's finances, upcoming projects, and decisions being made. Residents actually started attending board meetings again, something that had fallen off during Brenda's tenure when people felt their voices didn't matter. I even attended a few meetings myself, though I made it clear I was there as an interested neighbor, not as an HOA member. David always made a point to welcome me and occasionally asked my input on issues that might affect properties adjacent to the HOA, which I appreciated. It was the kind of respectful communication that should have existed from the beginning. One particularly interesting development came about 4 months after Brenda's removal. The HOA board discovered that she'd been overstating expenses and pocketing the difference for years. It wasn't a fortune, maybe $8,000 or $9,000 total, but it was enough to constitute embezzlement. When confronted with the evidence by the board's forensic accountant, Brenda quietly repaid the money to avoid additional criminal charges. Her probation officer was notified, and her community service requirement was extended. The revelation didn't surprise me. Someone willing to fabricate construction reports and trespass on private property probably had few qualms about financial impropriety. What did surprise me was how many residents expressed shock. Apparently, Brenda had been very good at presenting a polished, trustworthy image while operating without oversight. My relationship with the neighborhood improved significantly. People who had initially sided with Brenda came around once they understood the full situation. A few apologized directly, others simply became friendlier over time. I appreciated both approaches. Robert Chen, who had been one of Brenda's staunchest supporters, actually stopped by one afternoon to have a conversation. He looked embarrassed as he stood on my porch, hands shoved in his pockets. "Oliver, I owe you an apology," he said. "I was so focused on following the rules and supporting the HOA structure that I didn't stop to think about whether the rules were being applied correctly. I believed Brenda when she said you were being difficult. I should have looked into the situation myself." "I appreciate that, Robert. No hard feelings." "Can I ask you something? Why didn't you just agree to let the trucks use your lane? I mean, I understand it's your property, but it did make deliveries more efficient for everyone. Wouldn't a compromise have been easier?" It was a fair question, and I thought about how to answer. "Robert, it's not really about the trucks themselves. It's about the principle. If I had agreed, what would have been next? Would the HOA have decided my back 40 acres would make a nice community park? Would they have wanted to run utilities through my property? Where does it end? Property rights exist for a reason. When you let someone ignore those rights for convenience, you set a precedent that your property isn't really yours." He nodded slowly. "I hadn't thought about it that way. I was just focused on the immediate benefit, not the long-term implications. Plus," I added, "if Brenda had approached me respectfully from the beginning, maybe we could have worked something out. But she didn't. She just unilaterally decided to use my land and then got angry when I objected. That's not how you treat neighbors." "You're right. She definitely handled it wrong." He paused. "For what it's worth, the new board is working really hard to do better. David has been great. We're trying to rebuild trust." "I can see that. I think the neighborhood is headed in a good direction now." After Robert left, I reflected on the conversation. It was easy to demonize people who had opposed me during the conflict, but most of them weren't bad people. They had simply believed the wrong person and prioritized convenience over principle. Now that the truth was clear, many were willing to reconsider their positions. That kind of growth was encouraging. Amazon, for their part, seemed to have learned from the incident as well. I later learned through a conversation with one of the regular delivery drivers that they had updated their training and policies regarding route changes. Now, any modification that involved private property required multiple levels of approval and verification, including direct contact with the property owner. What had happened to me had apparently happened elsewhere too, and Amazon was trying to prevent future problems. The driver, a friendly guy named Marcus who I saw regularly, told me the story one day when he was delivering a package to my actual mailbox at the end of my lane. "Man, you wouldn't believe the paperwork now if someone wants to change a route," he said, shaking his head. "We had a situation in Charlotte where someone tried to get us to cut through a private parking lot, and it took like 3 weeks of approvals before they finally denied it. But honestly, I'm glad. I don't want to be caught in the middle of property disputes. That's not what I signed up for." "I don't blame you. None of this was the driver's fault." "Tell that to my supervisor," Marcus laughed. "He was pissed about the delays when you blocked your lane, but honestly, most of us drivers understood. We wouldn't want random trucks tearing up our driveways either." It was good to know that the people on the ground level understood the situation, even if their management had initially been resistant. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. I completed several major projects for work clients, earning enough to consider some improvements to my property. I had the lane professionally paved, which cost a small fortune, but was worth it for the durability and reduced dust. I also installed proper lighting along the lane and added some landscaping near the entrance that made it look more intentional and less like a forgotten dirt road. The game camera, which I had kept running out of an abundance of caution, captured mostly wildlife. Deer, raccoons, the occasional black bear ambling through in the early morning hours. No more unauthorized vehicles, no more unwanted visitors. About a year after the initial incident, I attended the HOA's annual meeting, which was held at the community center. It was well attended, probably 50 or 60 residents, a stark contrast to the meetings during Brenda's tenure that typically drew maybe 10 people. David Kim gave a State of the Association address detailing the financial health of the HOA, completed projects, and plans for the future. It was professional, transparent, and inspiring. He talked about the importance of community cooperation, respect for individual property rights, and working together for everyone's benefit without overstepping boundaries. Toward the end of the meeting, David surprised me by publicly acknowledging what had happened the previous year. "I want to take a moment to address something that was difficult for our community," he said. "Last year we had a situation involving delivery routing and property rights that escalated into legal action. It was uncomfortable, it divided neighbors, and it resulted in leadership changes. But I believe we're stronger for having gone through it. We learned important lessons about the limits of HOA authority, the importance of respecting individual rights, and the need for transparent, accountable leadership. Oliver Yates is here tonight, and I want to publicly thank him for his patience during that difficult time and for being willing to engage with the new board as we've worked to rebuild trust." The room erupted in applause. I felt my face flush, uncomfortable with the attention but appreciating the sentiment. Several people turned to smile at me or give me a thumbs up. After the meeting, numerous residents came up to chat, shake my hand, or share their own stories. It was a healing moment for the community, an acknowledgement that we had been through something difficult but had come out better on the other side. I even saw Brenda at the meeting, sitting in the back row. She had slipped in late and sat alone, not participating in discussions or socializing. When the meeting ended, she quickly left before I could decide whether to approach her. I wondered what she thought about everything, whether she had genuinely learned from the experience or just felt victimized by the consequences of her actions. Margaret Collins, who had become a good friend over the months, noticed my gaze following Brenda's departure. "She's been coming to meetings the last few months," Margaret said quietly. "Doesn't say much. I think she's trying to figure out her place in the community now that she's not in charge." "That must be hard for her." "Maybe, but it's necessary. She ran this place like her personal fiefdom for too long. A little humility will do her good." I nodded, though I couldn't help feeling a twinge of sympathy. Yes, Brenda had behaved badly, but watching someone fall from power and respect was never entirely comfortable, even when it was justified. As the evening wound down and people started leaving, David Kim approached me with a thoughtful expression. "Oliver, can I run something by you?" "Of course." "The board has been discussing expanding our community relations, particularly with property owners like you who are adjacent to but not part of the HOA. We want to establish a liaison system where we can communicate about issues that might affect you without overstepping boundaries. Would you be interested in being part of a committee that helps establish those guidelines?" I considered the offer. A year ago, I would have immediately said no, wanting nothing to do with the HOA in any capacity, but things had changed, and the new leadership seemed genuinely interested in doing things right. "I'd be willing to participate," I said, "as long as it's clear that I'm offering input as a neighbor, not agreeing to HOA jurisdiction over my property." "Absolutely. We want to establish good neighbor policies, not expand our territory. We've learned that lesson." We shook hands, and I left the meeting feeling optimistic about the future. The neighborhood was healing, leadership had improved, and people were learning to balance community cooperation with individual rights. The following months were remarkably peaceful. The liaison committee met quarterly, and we developed guidelines for how the HOA should handle situations involving adjacent properties. The framework we created emphasized communication, respect, and the recognition that not everyone in a geographic area is subject to HOA rules. It was common sense stuff, but it was important to formalize it so future boards wouldn't repeat Brenda's mistakes. My private lane remained private, properly paved and peaceful. Amazon deliveries continued to flow smoothly to the neighborhood through the correct entrance. The community thrived under new leadership. I never did have another significant interaction with Brenda Worthington. I'd see her occasionally around the neighborhood, always at a distance. She had moved to a different street within Willow Creek, apparently unable to leave the area entirely, but uncomfortable remaining on the same road where she had once wielded so much power. According to Margaret, Brenda had taken a job at a local real estate office, working as an assistant rather than an agent. It was a humbling position for someone who had once acted like she ruled the neighborhood, but it was honest work. Her criminal probation eventually ended, and she completed her community service. She never caused any more problems that I heard about. Sometimes I wondered if she understood why everything had happened the way it did, whether she had gained any insight into how her behavior had been inappropriate. Other times I figured it didn't really matter. The important thing was that the pattern had been broken, and the community had learned valuable lessons about accountability and limits on authority. 2 years after the initial incident, I was working in my home office when I received an unexpected email. It was from a resident in a neighboring HOA community about 10 miles away. She had heard about what happened with Brenda and the delivery trucks, and her HOA president was trying to pull something similar. She was asking for advice on how to handle it. I spent an hour crafting a detailed response, outlining the legal principles involved, the importance of documentation, and the steps I had taken. I also connected her with Daniel Pasternak, figuring he might be able to help or at least point her to local resources. Over the following months, I heard from several other people facing similar HOA overreach issues. Apparently, my case had become somewhat known in local property rights circles, a precedent that people could point to when dealing with aggressive HOAs. Daniel told me he had referenced the case in at least 3 other matters. It was strange to think that my simple desire to protect my private lane had turned into something larger, a small but meaningful stand against the kind of petty authoritarianism that sometimes develops in HOA structures. I hadn't set out to be any kind of activist or crusader. I just wanted to be left alone on my own property. But sometimes standing up for yourself has ripple effects beyond what you anticipate. Other people find courage in your example. Systems change because someone finally said no. Communities improve because someone refused to accept unreasonable behavior. As I sat on my back deck that evening, watching the sunset over the Blue Ridge Mountains, I reflected on everything that had happened. The conflict, the stress, the legal battles, and ultimately the resolution and healing. It had been exhausting, but it had also been necessary. My private lane wound through the trees in front of my property, peaceful and undisturbed. No unauthorized trucks, no trespassing, no one claiming authority they didn't have. Just my property, my rights, and my peace of mind. In the end, that was all I had really wanted. To be respected as a property owner and to have my boundaries honored. It seemed like such a simple, reasonable expectation. But I had learned that sometimes you have to fight for simple and reasonable, especially when dealing with people who believe their authority extends further than it actually does. The neighborhood around me continued to thrive, the HOA functioned properly under good leadership, and life moved forward. The story of HOA Karen and the rerouted Amazon trucks became something of a legend in Willow Creek, a cautionary tale told to new residents about the importance of respecting property rights and the dangers of unchecked HOA power. For me, it became a reminder that standing your ground, documenting everything, and refusing to be bullied pays off in the end. Not every fight is worth having, but some principles are worth defending, no matter how much easier it might be to just go along. My lane was mine, my property was protected, and justice had been served. Sometimes that's the best ending you can hope for.